access, tourism, healthcare, education, agriculture, infrastructure, Montserrat sustainable development. These are matters of importance for all of us. Tune in and listen to the discussion and hear from government officials as the Government Information Unit presents The Nation's Business, a radio program on the last Monday of every month starting at 8 p.m. on Radio Montserrat. Join the program, listen to the discussions, and share your views during the call-in segment. Join us then.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of the Nation's Business radio program by the Government Information Unit. The Nation's Business program is aimed at creating awareness on key developments in Montserrat, particularly those led by the Government of Montserrat. We highlight these developments by engaging ministry officials, managers, technicians in detailed discussions on the various projects, programs, and initiatives within the Government of Montserrat. As a reminder, the first 30 minutes follows an interview format, and we will open the phone lines at the last 30 minutes. So that's at approximately, we're starting now at just about 8:08, so we're looking at opening shortly after 8:35 thereabouts this evening. And the numbers to call then are 491-7227 or 491-9064. We also accept WhatsApp calls and comments on 496-2885. The focus of tonight's program is on the recently conducted population and housing census. We will be discussing the current stage of the process, some of the preliminary findings. Essentially, an update on the census is the focus for tonight. The census was conducted by the Statistics Department, which falls under the portfolio of the Ministry of Finance and Economic Management, MOFEM. I'm your host, Viona Alexander Smith, and joining me this evening for this very important discussion are officials from the Ministry of Finance and Economic Management and Statistics Department. I have with me this evening Financial Secretary, Honorable Lindorna Lambert Sweeney, Deputy Financial Secretary, Mr. Kenya Lee, and Chief Statistician, Siobhan Tuitt. Good evening. Good evening, all.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Good evening, Viona.
Welcome and thank you for sitting in on Nation's Business tonight. Very important discussion. If you're unable to hear, put your headphones on. You might not be able to hear me clearly without them. Yes, so thank you very much for joining me this evening on Nation's Business for a very important discussion. The Statistics Department, of course, as we know, recently released some preliminary key findings from the population and housing census. Now, before we get into that discussion, looking at the preliminary findings, it's important for us to first provide the public with an overview of the process that was undertaken in conducting the census exercise. So very briefly, if you can give that overview, please.
Sure, Viona. Thank you for that question. So conducting the population housing census involves several stages. Usually this spans on average about 2 years. So initially the department will plan for the census taking by preparing our budget, procuring the equipment and supplies, design and test the questionnaire. And it's crucial to say here that we have to ensure that our questionnaire meet the global standards for comparability purposes. So this means including questions that are relevant locally, regionally, and internationally. We also put a lot of work into preparing our advocacy plans such that, the ordinary person understands what it is that we're trying to do. We field test our procedures and our instruments, and we prepare maps also such that our field staff are able to locate every household on island. We also conduct training for our staff as well as our temporary field workers. And then we typically conduct the field work where our enumerators visit every household to collect data on the population demographics, housing conditions, and all the other relevant information on the questionnaire. After data collection, we process and analyze the information to generate the key findings, and these findings are then released to the public, providing insights into what the population looked like as at that reference period, which for us here in Montserrat was September 12, 2023. So in essence, all of that work to capture or do a snapshot of what the population or what it is that Montserrat looked like as at the 12th of September 2023.
Right, and data collection would have begun on September 23rd based on information recently released by the Statistics Department. Now, was the data collection process a seamless one for the Statistics Department, or were there challenges in the process? And if so, what were those challenges and how did those impact your quality of data collected, timeline, etc.?
Well, thank you for that, Viona. So let's review the significant dates so I can provide a comprehensive answer. So Census Day, as I mentioned just now, was the 12th of September 2023. Due to adverse weather conditions, our field work commenced in September, however, of September 23rd, 2023. Our original end date for enumeration, or the end date for data collection, should have been November 11th. However, it was extended to the 30th of November, which even then, Viona, enumeration still remained incomplete, primarily due to refusals and difficulty in making contacts with some individuals. Now, obviously, we had to address this issue, and we sought assistance from the Director of Public Prosecution Office, the DPP. And to be absolutely clear about what was done, we provided a list of persons who had outright refused to participate in the census to the DPP for guidance, considering that the census is mandatory by law under the Statistics Act of Montserrat. As a result, the Office of the DPP contacted several individuals who eventually agreed to be interviewed. There were no formal litigation or prosecution involved. Notwithstanding, Viona, I should say here, moral suasion is usually our go-to practice. And to this extent, we express sincere thanks to everybody who willingly and fully cooperated with our enumerators and supervisors. We understood that the process took a lot of time. It's really daunting to some extent, and we're really thankful to the persons who did so willingly and fully cooperated. So just to continue very quickly, Viona, the extension continued until the 30th of January, which allowed our enumerators and supervisors to finalize all enumeration and related activities specific to those cases. January 31st, we would have, at that point, we had a coverage rate or a response rate of 98.6%. And let me say what that means. This rate reflects the proportion of households or individuals who were successfully enumerated compared to the total number of households or individuals targeted for enumeration. So a high response rate is essential to ensuring the accuracy and reliability of the census data, as it indicates a comprehensive representation of our population. So in essence, Viona, despite the regrettable delay, ensuring inclusive counting was imperative to our department, and that is what transpired. Right. Some of the other challenges we had, most of our interviews were conducted in the afternoons when people were at home and available, but shortened daylight hours in the latter part of the year meant short hours of enumeration, especially on the weekdays. Typically, our population and housing censuses are conducted in May, where we had longer daylight hours. We also had a very small staff, and as such, we were pressed to ensure that we also maintained our normal work program. So our usual work program continued. And I'd like to use this opportunity also to thank each and every one of our staff members for their support. To some extent, Viona, we also experienced instances of negative publicity and misinformation. Some people had much concern about why it was important for them to provide their information, who will access their information, and how will their information be used. These concerns, however, we tried very hard to mitigate to the best of our ability through our advocacy and communication efforts. We tried our best to have what we considered to be the average or the laypersons, communicating such that persons understood what it is that we were doing. We were on the radio. We also called back lots of persons. So we put a lot of effort into ensuring that as much persons as possible, understood that we were doing. Also, Viona, I noted to you that our response rate was 98.6%, which therefore means we did not have 100% coverage. So I want to speak very briefly about that.
Yes.
So concerning individuals who weren't formally surveyed, we relied on administrative data to establish their age, or dates of birth, ensuring that they were included in the population count. However, since they weren't formally surveyed and no questionnaire was completed, their data isn't represented in our data set. All right?
Okay. All right, that's clear. No, but you also said successfully enumerated in your response there. Does that mean that persons would have answered all the questions
Yes.
to be
So-
classified as successfully enumerated?
Yes.
And what then happens to the incomplete enumeration process when persons don't answer all the questions? Do you still take that data on board? What happens there?
So persons who were not enumerated at all, let me make that clear, what we did was ascertain their basic information, which is your age, your date of birth, sex, and therefore we were able to include it in your total population
You
count.
ascertain that from them directly, or
No, from administrative data sources.
what does that mean for people who don't know what that means? Where did you access that data from?
Right. So the registry and the Social Security Services were the administrative data sources that we used to ascertain those things. However, for those persons, they will not be included in the entire data set as we were not able to enumerate them fully.
Okay.
All right.
Yes, understood. No, it's very critical that you explained all of this, because I think sometimes the public, in their want for information, they wanted the information very quickly and couldn't understand or appreciate why things were taking so long. And so it's important that persons understand that it's not a quick process. There are challenges that come up, and you have to mitigate those as they come along. You have to extend the period of data collection as a result of the challenges. Now, that brings us to where we are now as it relates to the preliminary key findings. The Statistics Department would have released some information last Friday. Was it April 19th or 2 Fridays ago? Take us through those preliminary key findings, the highlights, if you may.
Okay, sure, Viona. So very briefly, our population as at the 12th of September 2023 stood at 4,386 persons, of which the gender distribution fairly balanced, 50% female, 50.1%, with 49.9% male. In terms of the number of households, we're now down to 256 households. The population by location remains, again, fairly stable, with the southern region 19.6%, central region 33.1%, the northern region being the largest, 47.4%. In terms of the breakdown of the population by age, 0 to 14, 16.1%, 15 to 64, 64%, and 65 plus, 19.9%, Viona.
I know you said the household is down now to 256. What was it before?
Sure, I can. In 2011, Viona, the number of households were 4,775.
Okay. Right. Okay. So we have now.
So if I can just very
Sure.
quickly differentiate between the two totals. So the 4386 Viona is everybody who was enumerated, meaning you answered a questionnaire, plus persons who are in what we consider to be the non-private dwellings, the homes, prison, hospital, those things, and you will get 4386. However, the number of persons who completed a questionnaire stands at 4255. So when we do our analysis and we present our tables, the total that you will see there is 4,255, representing data from within the households.
Very important point to make there. So the population has declined by 10.9%, and we know that the public, that's something we were eagerly anticipating, because a lot of us were a bit concerned about that. But speak to us first about the trends as it relates to the population over the past few censuses. I know that the Statistics Department would have released some figures online about this decline. Is it a trend for us to have a declining population?
So, Viona, what we can say, yes, based on the data that we would have published in terms of the historical census information, yes, we know that we are suffering from, or we are categorized rather by a decline in population. In terms of reasons, so to speak, I note your question. One of the questions we asked on this particular census, or in the 2023 population housing census, was about the main reason for migrating at the time of departure. So persons were able to select from options such as employment, study, medical reasons, and to be family relatives. There was also another option allowing respondents to provide additional reasons that did not fit within the provided responses. So the SDM can explore the other responses to see what are some of the reasons that persons gave for leaving Montserrat between, however, 2011 and 2023. So we're looking at between the last two censuses.
Okay,
I
right.
will allow the FS and the DFS to potentially speak on this matter as well.
Okay, go right ahead.
To note that it wasn't the persons who left who was providing the data.
Right.
So it was data as reported by whoever family member who was speaking on behalf of that person.
Yeah, because that person is no longer here.
Right.
So it's just the head of the household or the reference persons telling us how their household would have changed between the two periods.
Right, and that's critical because I'm thinking, to effectively and adequately address population concerns, for example, we have to understand why people are leaving. And so it's good to hear that has been captured in the census data. But will there be other research, even on a small scale, that would explore this a bit further to understand what's happening with the population? And I know we're focusing a lot on the population, but there are other bits of data that will come out of the census that we'll get to in a minute.
So it's a topical issue in terms of the reduction in the population size. And as we continue with the Statistics Department to analyze the data, we'll provide those explanations as far as we can in terms of the data that we have. So we'll dig down into it, delve down deeper into the data, and we'll be able to publish specific data sets on areas that we think are of importance.
Over the years, as I would have mentioned, people have become concerned about the population and how it affects the cost of living. Can you give any comments where that is concerned? How does the population decline affects our cost of living on Montserrat? And if, in fact, people are correct in saying that because our population is declining, that is the reason for the high cost of living that we face on Montserrat.
I think, Viona, what I would want to interject to say here is that the census provides that baseline and we can use the data, but it's imperative that we perhaps do focus studies, which will involve policy, which is also within the Ministry of Finance, and statistics, and perhaps we can do a sample type survey where we directly look at what it is that you are mentioning, and that can be done.
So additional studies would need to be conducted
Yes,
to ascertain
Definitely.
that data.
So, but the census is a baseline.
Yeah.
Census on its own won't provide the answers.
Yeah. What process then, where are we now as it relates to compiling the final report? Because as we would have mentioned, this is the preliminary data coming out. Where are we now, and what are some of the other data sets can we expect to be revealed? Unemployment, I know that's another hot topic.
Okay, so Viona, additional findings will be released in the upcoming months by thematic areas. So we are currently working diligently to create the additional tables for future release. We recognize the significance of the census and remain fully committed to delivering the comprehensive key finding reports and thematic releases. And I'm saying reports here because we really want to zone into the thematic areas. So we will have reports covering things like housing and dwelling amenities, ethnicity and religion, country of birth, education, health, employment. You mentioned the unemployment rates. We really want to do it by thematic areas. We think it will be more instrumental to our wider population. We have, Viona, since we released our quick indicators. Persons have reached out to us for specific data and indicators, and we're dedicated to addressing these requests in a timely manner. We encourage other individuals to reach out to us if they have any specific needs or inquiries they may have. In terms of how we plan to disseminate the information, we really want to do so as we want to make the data as user-friendly as possible. We are trying our best to get away from just the tabular representation. We want to do more infographics, putting the data on social media, notwithstanding that we still need to do the reports. Those will come, but we want to, as much as possible, facilitate ease of reference and understanding and use of our data.
Mm-hmm. And for the public's understanding, because, when we sit in government, we are pretty much aware of how reports are channeled through the system, but the public doesn't know. What are the stages that a report has to go through before it is made public? What stages does it need cabinet approval? Does it need to go through that process before, or would Statistics Department compile the report and simply publish?
Right. So by virtue of how we operate, line manager, the Honorable Financial Secretary, is informed of the stages and where we're at. Typically, best practice for statistics departments is to release the data at once. Mm-hmm. So it's not a matter of awaiting cabinet approval for us here in Montserrat, and we're very thankful for that.
Right. So once completed, it goes
out.
We want to be clear and
sure
that even the preliminary data, it was released immediately. There's as the line managers for Statistics Department, I wasn't given the information much earlier than the general public, and Cabinet wasn't given the information any earlier than the general public. Cabinet does not interfere in the publication of statistical data, nor does the Ministry of Finance officials. It's published, and that is the independence that we want to give the Statistics Department. So I just want to make sure that is clear.
And it needs to be, we need to reiterate that, because a lot of times people tend to think that, it goes through this sort of hierarchy, and then things can be amended, and there's interference, and then there's no independence in the data. But what you're saying and what the public needs to take away is that once the Statistics Department compiles the report and says these are the findings, it is disseminated to the public.
Matter of fact, Viona, you're one of the first persons who will have contact with the data, because we share it to you for you to then disseminate with all the media houses. And it is only after you would have done that, then the Statistics Department, we actually put it out.
Yeah. Right. So very good. In terms of, timelines, we can't speak to any timelines at this point as to when the final one will be out. Some persons may hear the term preliminary findings and may now be wondering if those are just indicators that may change later on, or are the preliminary findings going to be the same reflected in the final report?
Okay. So at this stage, Viona, we have completed the data processing stage, and that is where we checked for errors, ensuring that there was no duplication of methods, nothing of that. All those things have been addressed or they have been corrected. So even though we're going to delve in further by topic, the counts that we gave you, 4386, 4255, those things will remain because the checks have been done. So those figures will not change at all.
So preliminary in this instance means early.
Early. Simple as that. Right. So how does the government now use the information? When the final report is published, how does the government use the information? What happens next?
So before I allow the DFS and the FS to chime in, one of the things I should have mentioned, Viona, is in the planning stages, we also allowed other MDAs, ministries and departments, agencies to share with us questions that they wanted to put onto the questionnaire, and so we actually had departments and ministries that shared questions. So as a matter of courtesy, those departments, those ministries will actually be putting the data out to them, and I'm sure a lot of them, they are waiting eagerly to get a hold of the data for planning purposes, that is.
And we have the usual buzzwords as it relates to the use of data for decision making, for policy and planning, for development of business cases, for project proposals, and those are true in our case. we can't, for instance, develop a proposal for funding for anything if we don't have the base data to support it. It's simply, even to find the costs. I know, for instance, during the budget debates, one minister mentioned that he would love to have persons, every household on Montserrat with indoor toilet facilities. Are we only able to determine how many people find themselves in a position where they don't have indoor facilities, and we're able to develop a costing and then prepare funding to deal with the response for that. So it helps with developing decision-making, costings, for research. Students who always want to write their thesis or any research paper, that's the first place they come to the statistics, sometimes to the Ministry of Finance, to get data to help support their research topics. Politicians use it to make decisions about their constituents. Governments use it in terms of support for funding and to support policy decisions. Very broad areas, but that's what it boils down to.
Okay, so the FS more than adequately covered what the government should use it for, but I want to make it clear, the census information should be used by everyone. The private sector use of the census information is just as important as government in terms of business development, targeting, identifying your market, identifying the scope of your business activities, the potential scope of your business activities in Montserrat, the demographics of your market. So it's about how Montserrat, not just government, is going to use the census information. And some of the additional work that the Statistics Department will be doing will be also essential for private sector persons to utilize in order to expand and ensure the viability of the businesses. One critical element of usage that this document will be put to is to be coupled with the population strategy that we're developing in conjunction with the UN, the UNDP in Barbados. We have the strategy, elements of the strategy completed, but we were awaiting information from the census to help target and focus the initiative that strategy will put forward. And not to say that the strategy will solve all of our problems, but it would be the first phase in tackling the population dynamics in Montserrat.
Right.
Viona, just to add, however, on the international scene as well, I did mention that some of the questions on our questionnaire was internationally comparable. And, as we work on the 2030 agenda, ensuring that no man is left behind, the census is one of the greatest assets in terms of collecting a lot of the data that we need to ensure that Montserrat is not left out when we're doing that 2030 assessment of where everyone is. So we're very happy that we were able to collect data, and we look forward to the analysis to see how it is that we will perform on the international front with regards to the Sustainable Development Goals.
Right. At this point, just to remind listeners that you can call in with your questions or comments on 491-7227 or 491-9064. We also accept WhatsApp calls and messages on 496-2885. You mentioned the population strategy being done in conjunction with UNPF, United Nations. Yes, right. So it is the population situation analysis essentially that you're speaking to, and that will be done this year or next year. Is there a timeline for that?
I think it comes in I want to say this year, but don't quote me on that. We can get that information to you. But they'll be coming back on Ireland. I think in May.
Yes,
in May.
In May.
And we also have a training that was also extended to the public, that persons were actually asked to enroll in this UN population strategy training. So we have it's a rolling project. I actually don't remember the end date either. Yes. But we have quite a number of things going on.
So both the census and the analysis will be used to develop governments of Montserrat's population strategy.
Right. Thank you for that. So going back to what you would have said regarding the fact that the census data is for everyone. It's not just for government. Private sector should also utilize the data. So it's not about government taking it and making policies for everyone, but you could also feed that into your decision-making process in the private sector. As it relates to the ministries, departments, and agencies, based on what you explained as well, my understanding is that they'll look through the data, look at the areas that are specific to them, and would recommend policies based on what they're seeing. You said as well the politicians would use it to make decisions, but in order for them to make those decisions, that feedback has to come from the MDAs as to what they're seeing as well. Yes.
Yes, the ministries would utilize the information, Ministry of Finance, to form policy advice to the policymakers, all linking back to government's overall policy thrust, driven through the strategic plans and objectives of the ministries and the government of Montserrat. So it would be up to the technicians now to utilize the census data in order to provide policy advice, and obviously the ministers and the policymakers will utilize that information to determine which recommendation they will take forward, which recommendation is most feasible in terms of the impact that they would want to have on their constituents and Montserrat as a whole.
So all policies have a social and an economic and environmental impact, a financial impact, and you have the data to support whatever it is, the direction, the target that government wants to focus on, or the direction they wish to go. It's a wide range of uses for the data. It's very hard to pin it down. Only if you have, for instance, a particular policy direction that you want to go, then you have the data which will support and enable you to present a number of options for consideration.
Right. So you would have mentioned as well that the census data, it's the baseline, and there are other bits of research that would be used to support decision making. Is there anything else that we can expect this year coming from the Statistics Department this financial year that would be done to support decision making? Any other studies, any other sort of analysis?
Well, I can't specifically say it's going to be this financial year, but I have to put a plug in for the Enhanced Country Poverty Assessment that will be happening in the next year or so. So it might fall into the next financial year, but it should begin in 2025. So the census has provided a baseline, but the ECPA is another critical survey, and it will provide information that is going to be beyond useful in terms of building cases for social programs, for aid, being able to actually put data and conduct analysis to some of the issues that persons speak about. So I'm not one to make conjecture without data. No, a lot of persons are free to do that, but my job doesn't allow me to do anything like that. I have to have data in order to come to a conclusion, to be able to provide policy advice. And one thing that has hampered us in the last couple of years is that lack of data. The census is the first step, and the ECPA, which has several elements, is going to close that gap that the census will leave. And that is when we'll be able to really have a true picture of the socioeconomic dynamics of Montserrat, the level of poverty, help in the setting of a minimum wage, and so many other policies that we've lacked the data to properly articulate and support, and to get support from not just cabinet, but from our donor partners as well when we have that data. And you'll be in a better position, the political leaders will be in a better position to argue regionally and internationally for Montserrat by utilizing that data. So I have to plug the ECPA.
But Yes. Wasn't there a country poverty assessment that was done recently as well? A few years ago? Within the last 5-6 years?
Nope.
No.
There was just talk of it happening.
Yes,
So
because
we
we started.
in 2020.
Yes.
Right.
COVID
Yes, so we were-
stopped that.
Yes,
Okay,
2 weeks
because-
in the field, 2 weeks in the field,
Yes,
and then we complete.
yes.
So it's still a part of what DFS Kenya would have mentioned. So we, unfortunately, we don't have the staffing to undertake two such undertakings. And as we got closer to the cutoff time for census, we shifted priorities to executing the census. Viona, if I just quickly can continue on what the DFS would have mentioned in terms of the ECPA. So the ECPA has 5 components. The measurement of poverty now is multidimensional. It's no longer just access to food and water. So the Stats Department now has that role of collecting household data in terms of income and expenditure, which based on some of the things that the DFS mentioned in terms of our poverty lines and our minimum wage, those type of things, the Statistics Department will be working on with the household budgetary survey, but that's only one component of the ECPA.
And I want to stress that the ECPA and the census were both delayed by the same thing, which was COVID.
Yes.
So we were delayed by COVID, and it became a strategic decision about what
Which one
happens
to do
first. And the census made more sense because the census would give us the ability to generate a sample for the ECPA. So it was a strategic decision based on what we need in terms of going forward. And you can't do 2 large surveys like that in a population of our size. You will exhaust the population, and you don't want them to have survey fatigue, because you would realize we would have done the census and then we did a lot of mini surveys during that period as well. So and the ECPA elements of the ECPA are very rigorous, and it's long, time consuming, but it is so very useful for the development of Montserrat. So we have to give the population time to breathe, give ourselves time to rest and prepare, give stats time to analyze the information that they got from the census before we jump into another big piece of work.
Okay. Viona, just to also break it down just a little further in terms of the sampling. So now that we have our frame, or we have the entire population, we're now better positioned to select a sample that will give us data that is representative. So sometimes when you don't have that representative data, the trying to make inference from a sample that's not representative is disastrous. Absolutely disastrous. And so oftentimes you need to make sure that you have a really good sample, a really good base, and census would have provided that for us. Just one other thing too, in terms of the importance of the HBS, out of that, based on what it is that households say they spend on, we will then aggregate to comprise a new basket of goods, which we use when we are monitoring our inflation rates for Montserrat. So the ECPA, and by virtue of the HBS, is a very important piece of exercise that we will undertake.
Yes. And we just have to explain the acronyms, because some people might just be tuning
Sure,
in. Enhanced Country Poverty Assessment. So
Yes.
that's the ECPA.
Yes.
And the HPS is the Housing and Household
Budgetary Survey.
All
Yes.
right. So just to ensure that everybody's following where we're going, you spoke about the basket of goods. And so, expound on that a bit further so that persons understand what is entailed in coming up with the basket of goods. What does that mean?
Okay.
So
typically when we do the household budgetary survey, the questions that we ask you will help us to come up with the list of goods and services that households spend their monies on. And based on that list, then we can come up with a list that we think is representative of what the average man spends on. Now, Viona, that may not include the things that you spend on as a bougie. It may not include Kenya, but it may include me, right? At the end of the day, it should be a basket of goods that represents the average spending, right? Now, something like that, you would imagine there's some aspects of the basket that changes very rapidly. Cell phones, how often do we upgrade? So it's very important that, we are in a position to upgrade our basket. But getting that data is also dependent on how quickly we can get to the households to get the data. Yeah. Bear in mind that I also said, in order for you to sample, you need a frame, a really good frame.
Yeah, and I would like to give the public an example, and I hope I'm giving a proper one here. But so the basket of goods, oftentimes people would, for instance, if they're moving to a new country and they want to understand, how much their money, their salary can spread in that country, they may look at the basket of goods calculated for that country and say, well, okay, the cost of living to buy the basic items would cost me $1,500 a month. And then they could look at that and compare it with their salary and their rent and whatever else and say, well, okay, I can definitely move to Montserrat and take this job because it's within my salary. Is that a good example or no?
It is. I'm happy you mentioned it because it's a good opportunity for us to provide some clarity.
Please.
So,
yes.
With the inflation, what is it that we what we compile is called the Consumer Price Index.
Yes.
That, Viona, is very different to a COLI index, or what we consider to be a cost of living index.
Which is what I just gave the example for.
So the two things are absolutely different.
Okay.
But sometimes we do know that people look at the inflation as a measure to understand what it's like to live in the country, and we generally understand that. We also, because we take part in certain international projects, we have what is called the PPPs, so you can understand
what is PPPs for the public. Purchasing
power parity, which therefore means you can compare what spending is like with the rest of the countries that are within the exercise. So Montserrat is a part of that. Say that to say, Viona, the COLI, or the cost of living index, is something that we are actively working on, ensuring that we try to develop a COLI index for Montserrat. At the moment, we do not have a cost of living index.
Right. So the basket of goods is totally different.
It is we use that to compile the consumer price index, and we measure our inflation from that.
Okay. All right. And would departments such as social services department use that to determine what an average family should need if they're providing support to a family?
Yes. So having data on the cost of living is vital to almost any department you can think about.
Right.
And that is why we are currently in the discussions.
Right. We're speaking as well not only about the housing and population census, but further assessments that will be done. And we spoke about the enhanced country poverty assessment, which would be coming on stream shortly. And shortly is relative, but in the near future, it'll be coming on stream. But it's important to understand what was learned in this data collection exercise from the census and how that would feed into other data collection exercises, such as the upcoming poverty assessments. So what were some of the lessons learned?
So Viona, in terms of, the main thing for us is consideration should be really given to conducting a post-census survey to get the general public's feedback. And we were not able to do that. Oftentimes the UN guidelines suggest that you conduct one. It has obviously budgetary constraints to it, and it's something that we'll take on board. In terms of our data collection methods, we would have noticed some things that we could have done differently to enhance the experience. The questionnaire in itself was very long, and that was one of the main complaints. Now, for us here at Montserrat, provided we can get our survey programs more regular, so if we can do our HBSs and all the other surveys more regular, we can definitely cut down on the length of the census. And that's something that we will now need to go back to the drawing board on to see how we can, alleviate the burden on the general public. Our quality control measures, few things that we could do differently to ensure that during the editing phase, we do not have a lot of checks to do. So now that we're using CAPI or we're using tablets, when we go into the field, we're no longer coming with paper, we're coming to you with tablets to collect the data, ensuring that a lot of our edits or our checks, as we call them, are front end. So you're unable to put in what we consider to be inaccurate information. So those type of things we want to incorporate to ensure that the editing or the data processing stage is shortened. And with all of that, Viona, as much as we thought that we did a good advocacy and communication campaign, there's always room for improvement there to ensure that, because there's still persons who said, oh, I didn't know, I didn't hear about the census, you know. So there's still always work to improve our advocacy and communication.
Right. And I'm assuming here, making an assumption that the enhanced poverty assessment would ask for more detailed questions than even the census would have. So I can anticipate that some persons may need a little bit more, help in understanding the importance of providing those sort of very personal details that some persons don't necessarily like to divulge.
Yes. So we definitely will be doing a lot more advocacy and communication, joint effort between the Policy and Planning Unit and Statistics Department. For the HBS Viona, it's very, very tedious. We're going to be asking you what you spent your monies on. And it's not a matter that you're going to say milk. It's what size milk.
What
we need it as detailed as possible, because remember, we're trying to come up with a basket of goods. We're trying to do so much things with this particular data. So having data at the detailed level for the HBS is very important. Obviously, we will ask persons, when they're going shopping, to hold on to your receipts, things that could help you. We'll provide some tips and little tricks to help them through the process.
Absolutely. Any other bits of data or information, rather, you'd like to share with the public this evening as it relates to the concluded housing and population census? It's concluded in terms of the data collection aspect of it, but of course, we're waiting for the final report.
Okay. So, Viona, in closing, we really just want to say thank you to all involved. The census is a huge task. It's not just about numbers. It's really about empowering and improving lives and informing decision-making for a brighter future for us here on Montserrat. The importance and reliance of the census cannot be overstated in any way. Without accurate census data, we risk overlooking the needs of those who require it most and hindering our collective progress. So therefore, the commitment to conducting our census and making it as inclusive as possible is paramount to ensuring fair and a prosperous society for everyone. So we really just want to say thank you to everybody who assisted us in any way. General public, we're asking persons to reach out to us if they have any requests or anything that they would like for us to share with them. If persons are unable to understand, call us up, have a conversation with us. We'll be happy to help. Our website, statistics.gov.ms. You can email us at statistics@gov.ms. We're on Instagram, statistics_MNI. We have our Facebook page. We have a YouTube page. We're really trying our best to put the information out in different ways such that we're not excluding anybody, Viona.
Yes.
That's my parting comments.
Thank you very much. Deputy FS?
I don't think I have anything to add on top of that, but I would be remiss if I didn't thank the Stats Department for the effort that they put in to get the census done as well as they have. I was there for every delay, every issue, and I saw the effort that went in by Siobhan and all of our staff. We have a brilliant staff a dedicated staff at the Stats Department, and they went above and beyond. Many times, a certain person would be sick and still being in the office trying to get the work done, but that was the level of importance placed on getting this critical piece of work completed. As Siobhan says, thank you to the general public. I think the participation rate is incredibly high, and we also like to thank the Director of Public Prosecution for pushing that rate a little higher as well. I just want to thank everyone, and obviously thanks to FS for her continued support. As Siobhan leaned on me, I would lean on the FS, and we tried to give them all the support, both financial and moral, as necessary. And I think that they should be congratulated, and the public should be congratulated for participating as willingly as they did.
Yeah, I agree, and we need to heartfelt thanks to everybody who participated. People tend to always want data, but not really willingly give it, and that's the only how we can get the data is if we get it from you. And one of the things I want to encourage or to say to the public is that we try to anonymize the data, because we have a small population and we release the data in such a way that you cannot identify individuals. So it's very important that they know that, and the confidence that you have in the department in terms of releasing data. So sometimes when you see data, it's presented in such a way because we have to protect those persons who share the data with us. So that's important for the general public to understand. And just to say thank you for everybody who participated. We are going to try as much as possible, as Siobhan pointed out, to modernize our processes so that we don't need to have such a tediously long questionnaire. When the next census comes around, we'll use as much administrative data as is possible and that we can access. So your date of birth is somewhere. We don't need to ask you, but we need to be able to access wherever it is. So we'll try and use those other methods and means to gather as much data as we can, and those that we reasonably cannot get, then those are the questions that we'll put on the questionnaire for a census. So thank you very much, everyone, for all the support.
Viona, last thing, you may want to know how Montserrat would have fared in comparison to, because as you know, I said that it's an international agenda. And in the region, in terms of performance, in terms of the number of months in the field, you had Montserrat and Cayman who were in the field for 4 months each. You had persons in the field for in excess of 20 months. We had coverage rates as low as 50%, and the highest being Bermuda with 100%. Now, understanding that in Bermuda, the penalties for non-compliance to the census very, very, very high. All right. Down from Bermuda, you had Montserrat with 98.6%. So in terms of our work and our efforts, we would have done comparably well with the in the region, that is.
Right, good point to make there. And just to remind the public that the next census is in 10 years.
Yes.
20, I mean, it sounds like far, but, you know, we turn around and it's 2033. 2033, right? Yes, so that's when the next census would really be due. I want to thank you all for coming in tonight and for speaking to us, the public, about the census and providing this very critical update. I'm Viona Alexander-Smith, and I was speaking tonight with the Financial Secretary, Honorable Lindorna Lambert Sweeney, Deputy Financial Secretary Kenya Lee, and Chief Statistician Siobhan Tuitt. We were having a conversation about the population and housing census and where we are as of today, April 30th. Preliminary findings were recently released, giving an indication of the current population, which is 4,386. And of course, the final report is being worked on. The team is continuing to put their efforts in their analysis, and that final report will come out in due course. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good evening.
Access, tourism, healthcare, education, agriculture, infrastructure, Montserrat sustainable development. These are matters of importance for all of us. Tune in and listen to the discussion and hear from government officials as the Government Information Unit presents The Nation's Business, a radio program on the last Monday of every month starting at 8 p.m. on Radio Montserrat. Join the program, listen to the discussions, and share your views during the call-in segment. Join us then.
ZJB.
Welcome.
You've got taste.